Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're heading over to Delhi.
A city that's unfortunately making headlines again for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, we're talking about the air pollution crisis that's gripping the city. It's so bad that the photos coming out of Delhi look like they're straight out of some kind of dystopian film.
The smog is incredibly thick.
We're seeing reports of the sun just looking like a hazy disk in the sky. Visibility is so low that it's actually causing flight disruptions, and the numbers are just really alarming.
Yeah, the Air Quality Index, or AQI as it's known, has hit a level that's been classified as severe plus. The actual number is 499.
Which is just.
Yeah, that's over 50 times higher than the safe limit recommended by the World Health Organization.
Wow, okay, so that number, 499, I mean, it's one thing to hear it, but it's another to really understand what it means for people's health. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So we're talking about these microscopic particles called PM 2.5. And when the AQI is that high, it means these particles are so concentrated in the air that they can actually bypass your body's normal defenses. So instead of being filtered out, they're getting lodged deep in your lungs and even entering your bloodstream.
So it's not just about, like you said, the hazy view and the inconvenience. This is a direct threat to the health of Delhi's, 33 million residents? Something like that?
It's a massive population at risk.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. So today we're going to break down this whole complex issue.
All right.
We're going to look at what's causing this recurring crisis.
All right.
We're going to look at how people are responding to it.
Yeah.
And what it might actually take for Delhi to, finally breathe easy again. So as we go through this, I want you to imagine yourself in charge. Okay. What would you prioritize if you were tasked with cleaning up Delhi's air? Let's see if our deep dive gives us some answers.
I love that challenge. And I think one of the really interesting things about this issue is that it brings together these local challenges with much larger global trends. So we'll need to look at everything from the way farmers are doing things in regions around Delhi to, big global pushes for things like clean energy. So it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, definitely. So to get started, let's paint a picture of what it's like to actually be in Delhi right now. I mean, our sources are painting a pretty grim picture, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I mean, if you look at social media, you'll see photos of the city just completely enveloped in this thick gray haze.
Wow.
It's really striking. And people are having to wear masks just to go outside. They're complaining of sore throats and burning eyes.
Okay.
Some people are even going so far as to call Delhi a gas chamber right now.
Wow. That's intense. And it's not just anecdotal either.
Right.
Because we're seeing data that backs this up. Our sources mention that there are specific areas like Alipur and Anand Vihar where those AQI levels, those are exceeding 50 times the WHO's safe limit. So this isn't just a little bit of haze. This is serious stuff.
Absolutely. This is having a huge impact on daily life. I mean, schools are being forced to close. A lot of offices are telling people to work from home if they can.
Right.
Flights and trains are being delayed or canceled. And there are all these health advisories out there urging people, especially those who are more vulnerable, to just stay indoors as much as possible. It's really disruptive.
Wow, it sounds almost paralyzing. Okay. So we've got this really stark backdrop. Now let's dig into the why.
All right.
Why is Delhi's air quality plummeting so drastically, especially now, this time of year? What's going on?
So one major factor, and this might surprise some people, is actually happening outside of Delhi's borders. Right now, it's the time of year when farmers in some of those neighboring states, like Haryana and Punjab, they're burning the leftover crop stubble after their harvest.
Oh, so they're clearing their fields.
Exactly. And these fires, they release just massive amounts of smoke and particulate matter into the air.
So it's almost like Delhi's getting hit by this wave of pollution from its neighbors.
That's a great way to put it. And unfortunately, the wind patterns during this time of year, they carry that smoke directly into Delhi.
Oh.
But it's important to point out that we can't just point fingers outwards here. There are a lot of factors within the city itself that are adding to this problem.
Okay, so what's happening internally that's making this whole situation worse?
Well, vehicle emissions are a big one, especially from those older diesel vehicles.
I see.
Then you've got industrial emissions to consider. Construction dust is another major contributor. And all of these things, they combine with that smoke from the crop burning that we talked about to create a really dangerous cocktail of pollutants.
And of course, we can't forget about Delhi's geography and its climate, right?
Right.
Because it almost seems like that creates a perfect storm for trapping all this pollution in place.
It really does. You see, during the winter, those colder temperatures trap pollutants closer to the ground, and Delhi often has very low wind speeds this time of year.
So there's not much to blow it away.
Exactly. That's why you get this dense layer of smog that just hangs over the city.
One of the things that came up in our research was this comparison to Beijing. Beijing used to be notorious for its smog, but they've made some impressive progress in cleaning up their air. So is there anything that Delhi can learn from Beijing's experience?
It's an interesting comparison because Delhi's actually been pretty successful at reducing its vehicular pollution in recent years. But they haven't seen the same kind of improvement as Beijing because they haven't really addressed that regional issue of crop burning.
Ah, I see. So it's that cross-border issue that's holding them back.
Exactly. The pollution from those neighboring states is still a major factor.
So even if Delhi manages to get its own pollution under control, they're still vulnerable to what's happening outside the city limits.
Exactly. And it really highlights the fact that air pollution, it doesn't respect those geographical boundaries. It underscores how important regional cooperation is going to be in tackling this challenge.
So we're dealing with a very complex problem. But before we jump into potential solutions, let's take a minute to understand the impact of this crisis. What are the real-world consequences for the people who are living in Delhi?
Right. Well, remember those PM 2.5 particles we talked about earlier? Well, they've been linked to a whole range of health problems.
Really?
We're talking about things like respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular problems, and even an increased risk of certain types of cancer associated with prolonged exposure to these particles.
And I think it's important to highlight here that our sources have mentioned that millions of Indians are dying each year from illnesses linked to air pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a staggering statistic.
It is. And it really underscores the human cost of this crisis. And it's not just a health crisis either. The economic costs are also substantial.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You've got the strain that this is putting on healthcare systems. You've got the lost productivity because people are getting sick or they're unable to work. And there's even an impact on tourism. It all adds up to a really significant economic burden.
So this smog is casting a very long shadow over every aspect of life in Delhi.
It is, and it's gone to the point where the government has been forced to take some pretty drastic measures. They've actually declared a public health emergency, and they've invoked what's called GRP4.
GRP4, what's that?
It stands for Graded Response Action Plan, Stage 4. And basically, it's a set of emergency measures that are designed to try to curb pollution when it reaches these critical levels.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? What are some of the things that are being done under GRP4?
Well, for one thing, they've shut down schools for most grade levels.
Wow.
They're strongly encouraging employers to have their staff work from home if possible.
Right.
They're restricting truck entry into the city. They've halted most construction activities. And they're even talking about ordering federal government employees to work remotely as well.
So it sounds like they're really trying to bring daily life to a standstill to reduce activity and keep people off the roads.
That's the goal.
But the big question here is, are those measures going to be enough?
That's what a lot of people are asking right now. And the Supreme Court of India is among them. They've actually criticized the Delhi government, saying that they've been too slow to act.
Really?
Yeah. They pointed out that the government waited until the AQI crossed 300, which is well into the hazardous zone, before they implemented GRP4.
Oh, wow.
So there's this sense that the response has been reactive rather than proactive.
So are people essentially saying that they're just trying to put out fires rather than addressing the root causes of the problem?
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling that they're not doing enough to prevent these crises from happening in the first place.
And that raises some important questions about the effectiveness of these short-term solutions.
Right.
Are they really protecting people's health?
Mm-hmm.
And can they really be sustained in the long run? You can't keep schools closed and construction halted indefinitely.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of experts are arguing that Delhi needs to shift its focus away from these Band-Aid solutions and start thinking about more long-term strategies that actually address the underlying causes of this crisis.
Okay. So what might those long-term solutions look like? Where do we go from here? We'll dig into that when we come back.
It really is a wake-up call. This whole situation in Delhi, it shows that we can't just wait for a crisis to hit before we start taking action. We need to be thinking about these complex problems and how to prevent them from becoming emergencies in the first place.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of those long-term solutions. What can be done to really break this cycle of air pollution emergencies in Delhi?
Well, one strategy that's been pretty successful in other cities, like Beijing, for example, is relocating those heavy industries. Moving them away from densely populated areas.
Okay.
So that way you're reducing the emissions right at the source rather than trying to manage them after they've already polluted the air.
So move the problem away from the people. That makes sense. And of course, we have to talk about promoting cleaner energy sources, right?
Yeah.
Moving away from fossil fuels and embracing renewable energy.
Yeah, that's a huge part of the puzzle. Investing in things like solar and wind power. Improving energy efficiency. Those are all going to be essential steps. But remember that other big contributor we talked about, the crop burning that's happening in the regions around Delhi.
Right.
Well, that's going to require a whole different approach.
Yeah, because how do you tackle a problem that's happening outside of your jurisdiction? You don't have control over what's going on in those other states.
You're absolutely right. And that's where this idea of regional cooperation becomes so essential. Delhi needs to work with the governments of those neighboring states like Haryana and Punjab and find alternatives to this crop burning practice.
I see.
And that might involve things like incentivizing farmers to adopt different practices, things like composting that crop residue, or maybe using it for something like bioenergy production.
So it's not just about Delhi cleaning up its own act. It's about working collaboratively with its neighbors to create a cleaner and healthier region for everyone.
Exactly. And while we're on the subject of collaboration, I think it's important to remember the role that public participation can play in all of this.
Okay.
Because every citizen can make a difference in this fight for clean air.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are some things that individuals can do to contribute to a solution? Because I think it's easy to feel kind of helpless when you're faced with a problem this massive.
Yeah, I get that. But honestly, one of the simplest but most powerful things that people can do is to just reduce their reliance on private vehicles.
Okay.
So use public transportation more often, carpool when you can, cycle, or even just walk if you're going a shorter distance. All of those little things add up to fewer cars on the roads and fewer emissions going into the air.
Yeah, those are all things that a lot of people could incorporate into their daily routine.
Yeah.
But what about beyond transportation? Are there other lifestyle changes that people can make that would have a real impact?
Absolutely. Being more mindful of our energy consumption at home is huge.
Okay.
So switching to more energy-efficient appliances. Just making a conscious effort to reduce your electricity use. Even things like being aware of your water usage. That all contributes to a greener lifestyle and ultimately helps to reduce our overall environmental footprint.
So it's about those everyday choices and making them with the environment in mind.
Exactly. But I think we also have to acknowledge that individual actions can only go so far. We need to see some systemic change as well. So as citizens, we need to hold our leaders accountable. We need to demand stricter environmental policies and really push for the implementation of those long-term solutions that we've been talking about. It's about making sure that our voices are heard and that clean air is a top priority for our government.
One of the things that really struck me in our research was this criticism of the government's response to this crisis. It seems like there's a real sense out there that they're not doing enough and that they're just reacting to problems rather than working to prevent them.
Yeah, there's definitely that sentiment. And it really highlights an important point. We can't afford to just wait until the pollution reaches these emergency levels before we start taking action. We need a more proactive approach, one that really focuses on stopping these crises from happening in the first place.
It's easy to get lost in the statistics and the policy debates, but at the end of the day, there are real people whose lives are being deeply affected by this crisis.
Right. And we can't forget that because these aren't just numbers on a chart.
Right.
They represent families who are struggling with respiratory illnesses. They represent children who can't even go outside and play without putting their health at risk. The elderly are especially vulnerable to the impacts of this pollution. It's a human story.
It really drives home the point that this isn't just an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue.
Yeah.
Everyone deserves to breathe clean air.
Absolutely. And often the burden of this pollution falls disproportionately on the most vulnerable populations, the people who may not have the resources to protect themselves or escape the worst of it.
That's a really good point. So as we look ahead, it's crucial that any solutions that are implemented, they have to address those inequalities. They have to ensure that everyone benefits from cleaner air.
Yeah. Equity and environmental justice need to be front and center in any plan that aims to tackle this crisis.
Okay. So we've talked about the challenges, the potential solutions, the role of individuals and governments. But what does the future hold for Delhi? Is there reason to be optimistic? Can things actually change for the better?
Well, predicting the future is always a bit of a gamble, but I do think there are some encouraging signs. I think the growing public awareness of this issue is a major driver of change. People are demanding action, and that's putting pressure on the authorities to really take this crisis seriously.
So public pressure can be a powerful force for good.
Absolutely. And we're also seeing these really exciting advancements in technology that could play a role in cleaning up the air.
Like what?
Well, for example, there's a lot of research and development happening in the field of renewable energy. Electric vehicles are becoming more and more popular, and we're even seeing innovations in air purification technologies.
So there are a lot of promising developments on the horizon. But realistically, how long do you think it's going to take for Delhi to see significant and lasting improvements in its air quality?
It's not going to happen overnight, that's for sure. It's going to require sustained effort, long-term planning, and cooperation on multiple levels.
So it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. But, if we look at examples like Beijing, which managed to drastically reduce its pollution in a relatively short amount of time, it shows that change is possible. It shows that we can make progress if we have the will.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes down to political will and commitment from leaders.
Yeah, we need leaders who are willing to make those tough choices. Implement policies that may not be popular in the short term, but are ultimately going to benefit everyone in the long run.
Exactly. And that's where we as citizens come in again. We need to hold those leaders accountable. We need to keep demanding action. And we need to make sure that clean air stays at the top of the agenda.
We were talking earlier about innovative solutions, and I came across something interesting in our research, this idea of using artificial rain to combat air pollution. Have you heard about that?
Oh, yeah. That's a really fascinating concept. And actually, it's something that's being explored in several countries, including India.
Wow.
The idea is to use techniques like cloud seeding to actually induce rainfall, which can help to literally wash pollutants out of the air.
So it's like giving the city a giant shower to try and cleanse the air.
That's a great way to put it. And it's still pretty experimental, but it holds some promise. It could be another tool in the toolbox, so to speak, for managing air quality, especially during those periods of really severe pollution.
It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. But if it works, it could be a game changer.
It really could. And I think it highlights how important it is to invest in research and development, to keep exploring these outside-the-box ideas that could lead to real breakthroughs.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question. We've talked about all these challenges and potential solutions, the roles of individuals and governments. But what if you were in charge?
Ooh, I like this.
Imagine that you're the one tasked with tackling Delhi's air pollution crisis. What bold, innovative solutions would you put into action to ensure that this city can finally breathe freely again?
What a fantastic question. It really challenges us to think creatively and to envision that future where clean air is a reality, not a luxury for everyone in Delhi.
Exactly. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Share your ideas with us on social media, and let's keep this conversation going. We'll be back in a bit to wrap things up. All right, we're back. And I hope you've had some time to really think about those bold, innovative solutions for Delhi's air pollution crisis. It's a challenge that really requires us to think outside the box.
It does. It's been fascinating to really dig into all of this information with you.
Yeah.
And what's really become clear to me is that there's not just one single solution. There's no magic bullet that's going to fix everything.
Right.
It's going to require a lot of different approaches working together. We need technological advancements for sure. We need policy changes. And we also need to see a real shift in how people are behaving.
So it's like this tapestry of solutions where each thread is contributing to a cleaner, healthier Delhi.
I like that. That's a great way to put it.
Before we wrap things up, I wanted to circle back to that comparison we made earlier with Beijing.
Yeah.
Because their story offers some hope, doesn't it?
It does.
They faced a very similar crisis not that long ago, but they were able to turn things around.
They really did. And I think it's proof that change is possible, even when the challenge seems overwhelming at first. Beijing implemented really strict regulations on industries. They invested heavily in clean energy, and they launched these public awareness campaigns that really helped to change the conversation about air pollution.
And it makes you wonder, what was the spark that really got things moving in Beijing? Was it public pressure? Was it political will? Or was it a combination of both?
I think it was definitely a combination of factors. The public outcry reached a point where it just couldn't be ignored anymore. But you also need strong leadership to really make a difference. Leaders who are willing to make those difficult decisions. and who are willing to prioritize long-term sustainability, even if it means some short-term costs.
And that brings us back to that idea of the role that citizens play in all of this.
Yeah.
We can't just sit back and wait for change to happen. We have to actively demand it.
We absolutely do. Whether it's holding our leaders accountable, pushing for policies that protect the environment, or just making our voices heard, all of those things are essential. And remember, individual actions, when you multiply them by millions, can have a ripple effect and really create change.
This whole deep dive has been a really powerful reminder of just how interconnected we all are, not just within a city, but across regions and even globally.
It's true. Air pollution doesn't stop at borders.
No.
And it really highlights the fact that this is a global challenge that's going to require global solutions.
Right.
We need to be sharing knowledge, supporting each other, and learning from both our successes and our failures. That's how we're going to create a world where everyone can breathe clean air.
So as we wrap up this episode, what's the key takeaway you hope our listeners are going to walk away with?
Well, more than anything, I hope they walk away feeling informed and empowered and engaged. You know this crisis is complex. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But it's not insurmountable. There's a role for all of us to play. And every action, no matter how small it might seem, contributes to the solution.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening exploration for me, and I have to say, I'm feeling cautiously optimistic.
Me too.
The challenges are very real, but I think the momentum for change is building.
Yeah, the awareness is growing. There's a real sense of urgency that I haven't seen before. I think people are really starting to understand the true cost of inaction.
Yeah. So to all of our listeners out there, we say stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. The journey of learning and discovery never ends. And who knows, maybe one of you listening right now will be the one who comes up with that breakthrough solution that helps Delhi and cities all around the world finally breathe freely again.
Until next time, keep diving deep.